an overlooked part of our built environment. They contain historical documents, which are the gravestone markers that have important clues to the past. And the Ithaca City Cemetery also represents movements and milestones in the field of landscape architecture. And this cemetery has been active for over 200 years, and it still is active today. So it really does represent a very wide range of burial practices, gravestone art, landscape design, and just showing the different ways that people think about life and death over the centuries. So we're going to see a lot of cool stuff. The first area of our tour here, the lowest part of the cemetery here, basically everything that's to the right of the main drive going through is the oldest part of the cemetery. This part of the cemetery was sort of established by accident or by expedience in about 1790 or 1791. The first burial that was reportedly took place here was a 17-year-old girl named Rachel Allen, whose family was moving through the area, probably on their way to settle some piece of land that they'd bought, or maybe a piece of land that they'd won through the New York State military tract lottery. And if you don't know that history, before the 1790s, this area was not settled by people of European descent. The Cayuga Indians who had lived here and their predecessors had been here since at least 7000 BC. They were driven from the area by the new Continental Army, and the area between Seneca and Cayuga Lakes was surveyed and subdivided into lots that were given by lottery to New York's veterans of the Revolutionary War. Instead of paying them cash, they were paid with land. Some of the veterans came out to settle their own tracts, but most of them sold to land speculators who then resold the land to people that wanted to come out and settle, who were coming from other parts of New York State or New England, or some of the more established mid-Atlantic colonies. And so when Rachel Allen's family was passing through this area, there were only a few families that had settled here, and that was near the base of Buffalo Street, where you might have noticed the historical markers. The spot was probably chosen because it was away from where people had settled, but it was still close by, and it was high enough that it was free from the risk of flooding. And those were pretty much the concerns for people choosing burial sites during the frontier period. The grave, if it was marked at all, would have probably been with a handmade wooden cross or a stone that may or may not have been carved if they had the time and the means to do so. You're going to see as we walk through some of the oldest markers in the cemetery, including slate markers from the very early 19th century, which gave way to marble in about 1840 once marble from Vermont became available here. And that depended on the ability to transport the material. As you probably know, this area was fairly remote when it was first settled. People were only able to get here by carriage, and the roads are really bumpy, and it was not a pleasant journey, and they used the waterways as best as they could. So, like I said, this site was chosen for expedience. And then over the years, as more people came to the new burgeoning village, more burials took place here, and it sort of became the de facto burying ground for the village. There was nothing really official about it at first. This land was owned by Simeon DeWitt, and apparently he didn't mind that people were using his land for burials, and he gave and then later sold some more of his land to the village for use as the village burying ground. And in 1824, the village of Ithaca raised taxes to erect a fence and to improve this land. And then in 1835, a visitor and observer wrote about the cemetery. It is delightfully situated on a lofty eminence, as all graveyards ought to be, and surrounded very nearly by beautiful prospects. And he was referring to the views from this site, which would have been historically much more open than they are now. Not just because of the trees that have grown up outside the cemetery, but also the trees that have grown up inside the grounds. So right now we're going to walk through the oldest part of the cemetery and see a nice example of an early 19th century gravesite.